After Diane Keaton's death, Hollywood began to whisper. People talked about broken love, betrayal, and regret. Some said Al Pacino broke her heart. Others claimed she was the one who walked away. But the truth was far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anyone ever imagined. She was born Diane Hall on a crisp winter morning, January 5, 1946, in Los Angeles, California. The post-war world was still finding its rhythm, and so was the young girl who would one day redefine what it meant to be both vulnerable and strong on screen. Her parents, Dorothy and Jack Hall, weren't Hollywood royalty or social elites. They were the sort of people who found meaning in the small, quiet corners of life. Dorothy was a homemaker with an artist's eye, a photographer who turned ordinary family moments into still lives of emotion. She taught Diane something that would become her lifelong compass. That imperfection is often the truest form of beauty. Her father, a disciplined civil engineer, balanced the creative chaos of their household with precision and purpose. From him, Diane learned the value of stability, that even the most whimsical dreams need structure if they're ever to stand on their own. The combination of her mother's poetic vision and her father's logic formed the foundation of the woman Diane would become, a dreamer with her feet on the ground. As a child, Diane was fascinated by human behavior. She was an observer, watching faces, gestures, tones. She would mimic people not out of mockery but out of curiosity. She wanted to know what it meant to be someone else. While other children were content with dolls or playgrounds, Diane wanted to slip into other skins, other minds. She didn't yet know it, but she was already acting. Her world was one of imagination, radio shows, old movies on television, neighborhood plays. Every film she watched left an imprint, every actor she saw became a teacher. Somewhere between those flickering black and white frames, she decided she wanted to live inside that world. Hollywood was just a few miles away, but to Diane, it might as well have been the moon. She didn't want to be part of the glitzy, commercial machine. She wanted to tell stories that mattered. She wanted to find truth. And truth, as she would later discover, is rarely glamorous. After high school, Diane left Los Angeles behind, trading palm trees for skyscrapers. New York City in the 1960s was raw, chaotic, and alive. It was the perfect stage for anyone searching for themselves. The city's rhythm was electric, pulsing through its streets, jazz clubs, and underground theaters. For Diane, it was a world of endless possibility. She enrolled at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater, a legendary acting conservatory known for the Meissner technique, a method that emphasized truth and emotional expression. It wasn't about pretending to feel, it was about really feeling. For Diane, this approach clicked instantly. It gave her the permission to explore all the contradictions within her: fear and confidence, humor and melancholy, control and chaos. She worked tirelessly, waiting tables, auditioning endlessly, rehearsing in cramped apartments. It was a time of poverty and discovery. Every rejection taught her resilience. Every small success was a spark that kept her moving forward. Her first notable break came when she joined the original Broadway cast of Hair in 1968. The musical was a revolution, a celebration of freedom, counterculture, and raw humanity. It was provocative, loud, and unapologetically alive. Diane stood out not just for her talent but for her spirit. She refused to conform to the industry's expectations. She didn't look or act like the typical ingenue, and that's exactly what made her unforgettable. Audiences saw something different in her, a mix of warmth, awkwardness, and authenticity that was utterly magnetic. And among those who noticed was a young writer and comedian who had begun making a name for himself in New York's stand-up circuit, Woody Allen. Their first meeting wasn't cinematic in the usual sense, no dramatic lighting or sweeping music, but in hindsight, it was the moment two creative forces recognized each other's frequency. Woody was cerebral, neurotic, and endlessly analytical. Diane was spontaneous, charming, and unfiltered, yet beneath their differences lay a shared curiosity about human nature. They were both storytellers, each trying to make sense of the absurdities of life through humor and honesty. Woody was instantly taken by her energy. He once described her as adorable, funny, and completely original. Diane, in turn, was fascinated by his intelligence and eccentricity. Their connection was not the fiery, cinematic kind. It was intellectual, emotional, almost telepathic. They spoke the same artistic language. As their relationship deepened, Woody began writing parts for her, first in his stage play Play It Again, Sam, and later in a string of films that would define both their careers. On stage, their chemistry was palpable. Diane's quirky charm softened Woody's anxious persona, his wit gave her a structure to play within. They balanced each other in a way that felt almost scientific. Their relationship, romantic at first, evolved into something more complex, a deep, creative symbiosis. Even after they parted as lovers, their artistic partnership continued to flourish. They trusted each other's instincts completely, even when they disagreed. It was a rare kind of friendship, built not just on affection but on shared vulnerability. When Annie Hall premiered in 1977, it wasn't just another romantic comedy, it was a cultural earthquake. The film blurred the line between fiction and reality so subtly that audiences couldn't tell where Diane ended and Annie began. Woody wrote the script, but Annie's spirit, her clothes, her laugh, her insecurities were all Diane. She wasn't just acting, she was revealing. The film became a mirror of their real relationship, filled with love, confusion, and bittersweet reflection. Annie Hall, the character, was everything Hollywood heroines were. She was awkward, hesitant, unpredictable. She didn't chase perfection, she embodied imperfection. Her style, the now iconic menswear look of baggy trousers, vests, and hats, was purely Diane's invention. It broke every fashion rule of the time and in doing so created a new one. She made vulnerability fashionable. When audiences watched Annie Hall, they weren't just seeing a love story between two characters. They were witnessing a dialogue between two artists who once loved each other and still did, in some ineffable way. Woody's writing provided the architecture, but Diane's performance gave it a soul. The film went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actress for Diane Keaton. She was stunned by the recognition. For her, acting had never been about fame or trophies, it was about truth. And in Annie, she had found a truth that was deeply personal. Yet the irony was undeniable. Annie Hall immortalized a relationship that in real life had already ended. In the wake of Annie Hall's success, Diane became one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. But fame never seemed to sit comfortably on her shoulders. She remained the same thoughtful, slightly eccentric person she'd always been. While Woody continued his prolific career, Diane ventured into new territory, working with directors like Francis Ford Coppola in the Godfather trilogy, where she played Kay Adams, the wife of Michael Corleone. It was a drastic shift from the breezy humor of Annie Hall. Kay was quiet, restrained, and tragic. Through that role, Diane proved that her range extended far beyond the neurotic charm people associated with her. She could carry gravitas, command silence, and hold her own alongside cinematic titans like Al Pacino and Marlon Brando. Yet even as she built a diverse filmography, the shadow of Annie Hall, and by extension Woody Allen, never fully faded. Journalists and fans kept returning to that story, that chemistry, that what if. Diane never denied the importance of Woody in her life. In interviews, she often spoke of him with warmth and humor. "He was my great love," she once said, but she also emphasized the independence she had found after their separation. She didn't want to be defined by anyone else's narrative. Instead, she wrote her own. As she aged, Diane did something few Hollywood actresses dared to do. She embraced it. She refused to hide her quirks or her insecurities. She wore them proudly, just as she wore her trademark hats and turtlenecks. She began directing and producing, exploring new forms of creative expression. Off-screen, she adopted children and found fulfillment in motherhood later in life, another unconventional choice that defied expectation. Through her memoirs, particularly Then Again and Let's Just Say It Was Pretty, Diane revealed the woman behind the image, introspective, anxious, funny, and profoundly self-aware. She spoke candidly about her relationships, her fears, and her ongoing search for meaning. And yes, she wrote about Woody not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude. He remained, in her words, a constant conversation in my head. That line, a constant conversation, perfectly encapsulates what their connection became. Even without physical closeness, their bond endured through art, through memory, through mutual understanding. It wasn't romantic anymore. It was something quieter, more profound, an eternal dialogue between two minds that once met and never fully drifted apart. Diane Keaton's legacy, in many ways, is built on her refusal to conform. She never molded herself to fit Hollywood's standards of femininity or beauty. Instead, she redefined them. In Annie Hall, she showed that a woman could be both awkward and alluring, insecure and powerful. In The Godfather, she revealed that strength could coexist with vulnerability. In her later roles, from Baby Boom to Something Gotta Give, she continued to portray women who were complex, imperfect, and deeply human. Her fashion sense became a cultural statement, androgynous, playful, timeless. But beyond the hats and gloves, what made Diane unforgettable was her honesty. She never pretended to be anything she was. And that authenticity is what drew Woody to her in the first place, and what keeps audiences drawn to her even now. For decades, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton remained artistic soulmates. Though their paths diverged, with Woody making dozens of films and Diane exploring photography, writing, and design, they occasionally reunited on-screen, most notably in Manhattan and Radio Days. Their connection evolved into something like an artistic echo. One would create something, and the other would reflect it in a new way. Each was, in a sense, part of the other's creative DNA. Even as Woody faced controversy later in his career, Diane remained steadfast in her respect for his work. She spoke carefully, with compassion but also with distance, acknowledging the complexities without erasing the history they shared. For her, loyalty didn't mean blindness. It meant recognizing that art and life are both messy, imperfect things, and that truth often exists in the space between them. What remains most powerful about the story of Diane Keaton and Woody Allen isn't the romance itself, but what it represents. It's the story of two people who mirrored each other's vulnerabilities, who turned their shared fears and flaws into art. Together, they captured what it means to love someone not perfectly but truthfully. In the end, Annie Hall wasn't just a movie. It was a conversation between two souls trying to understand why love fades but connection doesn't. And decades later, that conversation still echoes. You can see it in Diane's laughter when she talks about him, in Woody's nostalgic references to Annie in later films, in the way audiences still see a piece of themselves in that fragile, funny, doomed love story. Theirs was never meant to be a forever romance. It was meant to be a mirror, reflecting who they were, who they became, and what they gave to the world through each other. By the time Reds began filming in 1981, Diane Keaton had already become a cultural icon. She was no longer the ingenue from Annie Hall or the quiet wife from The Godfather. She was something rarer, a woman defined by her complexity, not her conformity. And it was in that moment of transformation that her life intersected with another Hollywood legend, Warren Beatty. He was everything Woody Allen wasn't: confident, commanding, magnetic. Where Woody dissected the world through humor and hesitation, Warren seemed to conquer it through charm and sheer willpower. To be near him was to feel pulled into a gravitational field of charisma. When Diane met him, Beatty was already a force of nature. He had built his reputation not only as one of Hollywood's most talented actors and directors, but also as one of its most infamous romantics, a man whose love life was as public and unpredictable as his career. But what people often overlooked was his intelligence. Warren wasn't just handsome or charming, he was brilliant, meticulous, and endlessly curious about the human soul. And that, more than his fame, is what drew Diane to him. She later described him as brilliant, complex, and charming, three words that could just as easily describe herself. Their connection wasn't built on opposites attracting, it was built on equals colliding. When Warren approached her for Reds, he wasn't just offering a role. He was inviting her into his most ambitious project, a sweeping historical epic about journalists and revolutionaries, about idealism and loss, about how far people will go for what they believe in. The film demanded emotional range and endurance. It was the kind of movie that could only be made by someone obsessed with truth, and that's exactly what Warren was. He pushed everyone on set, including himself, to the edge of exhaustion in search of authenticity. Diane, used to the quiet precision of Woody Allen's direction, found herself in a completely different world. Where Woody built films through dialogue and psychology, Warren worked through passion and chaos. Every day on Reds felt like a battle, one she both dreaded and craved. She once recalled that working with Warren was intense and unpredictable, yet thrilling in a way that made you want to rise to the challenge. That intensity mirrored their off-screen relationship. Their romance was not a quiet affair. It was a storm, electric, consuming, full of contradictions. Diane, with her gentle neuroses and careful humor, found herself swept up in Warren's boldness. He was the kind of man who would fly halfway around the world for a conversation, or change a scene minutes before shooting because he'd just thought of something better. He made her feel seen, but in a way that sometimes frightened her. Where Woody saw her mind, Warren saw her entire being, her strength, her fear, her contradictions. There's a story she's told that captures their dynamic perfectly. Diane was terrified of flying. For her, stepping onto a plane meant surrendering control, something she'd never found easy. Warren, understanding her fear, decided to face it with her. He boarded the plane, held her hand throughout the flight, talked her through the turbulence, and made her laugh when she wanted to cry. When they landed safely, she assumed they'd travel on together. But instead, Warren simply turned around, boarded another flight, and went back home alone. It was the grandest, strangest act of affection, romantic, cinematic, and fleeting. That moment defined them. He was the man who would go to impossible lengths for her, but never stay still long enough to be caught. In many ways, Diane and Warren were like twin comets, bright, beautiful, and destined to cross paths only briefly. Warren's energy was expansive. He thrived on motion, on risk, on constant reinvention. Diane, though adventurous in her work, was deeply introspective in life. She wanted connection, understanding, a sense of grounding that fame rarely allowed. Their relationship became a tug-of-war between independence and intimacy. He admired her strength, she admired his fearlessness, but neither could quite bend enough to fit into the other's rhythm. Still, their time together left a mark. Warren challenged Diane to think bigger, to take creative risks she might have avoided otherwise. In Reds, her performance as Louise Bryant, a woman torn between love and ideology, became one of the most powerful of her career. It earned her another Academy Award nomination, and more importantly, it earned her a new kind of confidence. For the first time, she wasn't just someone's muse, she was a force in her own right. Looking back, Diane has spoken of Warren with the same mixture of admiration and fond bewilderment that others often express about her. She knew he was difficult, obsessive, demanding, sometimes overwhelming, but she also knew that brilliance often comes wrapped in contradiction. He was complicated, she once said, but he made me braver. And that might have been the gift of their relationship, courage. After Woody, Diane had mastered introspection. With Warren, she learned audacity. The two relationships couldn't have been more different, but both were essential chapters in her evolution as an artist and as a person. Woody taught her the art of conversation, Warren taught her the art of conviction. Between them, she found her voice. When Reds was released, critics hailed it as a masterpiece, a daring blend of history, romance, and political reflection. It was a film about dreamers who refused to compromise, and in many ways, it mirrored the personalities behind the camera. For Diane, playing Louise Bryant wasn't just another role. It was an act of self-definition. Louise was passionate, intelligent, conflicted, a woman who demanded to be both lover and leader, muse and maker. That duality resonated deeply with Diane's own life. She once admitted that portraying Louise helped her confront parts of herself she'd never fully understood: her hunger for independence, her fear of losing identity in love, her simultaneous desire to connect and to escape. In the film's most poignant moments, her face carries the weight of both heartbreak and resilience. Critics praised her for capturing the emotional essence of a woman standing at the intersection of love and purpose, a place Diane herself knew well. When the relationship with Warren eventually faded, it didn't end in drama or scandal. It simply dissolved, the way certain stories do when both people realize they were meant to meet, but not to stay. For Diane, there were no regrets. She carried with her the lessons, the laughter, the memories of flying hand in hand and then watching him vanish back into the clouds. For Warren, Diane represented something rare: authenticity without pretense, beauty without vanity. Years later, when asked about her, Warren described her as one of the most extraordinary people he'd ever known. And for Diane, that was enough. Their time together had been brief but transformative, a love that burned brightly, then quietly became part of her mythology. Then came The Godfathers. It was 1971, and on that set Diane met Al Pacino, intense, mysterious, endlessly fascinating. "I was mad for him," she once confessed. Charming, hilarious, a non-stop talker, and oh gorgeous. Their chemistry ignited both on and off screen. But as years passed, Diane wanted more. She gave Pacino an ultimatum: marriage or goodbye. He couldn't take that step, she walked away. Yet the connection between them never truly vanished. Even decades later, when they reunited for The Godfather Part 3, their bond was still palpable, lingering, unspoken. After Keaton's passing, whispers began to resurface. Was it true that during her relationship with Al Pacino, Diane had been involved with someone else? Was there a secret she'd carried for decades? Tabloids called it the hidden affair. Some claimed she reconnected with a man from her past, maybe Woody Allen, maybe Warren Beatty. But as friends later revealed, those stories were built on fragments and fantasy. The truth is, Diane never betrayed Al Pacino. Not in the way the world thinks. Her so-called infidelity wasn't physical, it was emotional. Even while she loved Pacino, part of her heart remained tied to her past, to the men who shaped her, to the memories that refused to fade. She was a woman who loved deeply but differently. In her own words, she once said, "I never found the right person, so I created love in my own way." And she did. In her 50s, she adopted 2 children, Dexter and Duke, and found fulfillment not in romance, but in motherhood and self-discovery. On October 11, 2025, the world lost Diane Keaton. The actress, the muse, the style icon, the woman who made awkwardness beautiful and imperfection inspiring. She left behind not a scandal, but a legacy. A legacy of authenticity, independence, and courage to live by her own script. Al Pacino later said of her, "Diane was one of a kind, she had a light that never went out." In the end, Diane Keaton's story was never about betrayal. It was about the search for connection in a world that often misunderstands love. She didn't cheat on anyone, she simply refused to stop loving. Because some hearts are too big to belong to just one person, and hers was one of them.